Good evening, comrades. Thank you for joining us for the second session in our new series, Building a Communist Party, Past Attempts and Future Prospects. We've had a very good launch last week with about 135 people all in all were in the session, which is great and shows that there really is an interest in this issue, and it's a very important issue for sure, how we organize and how we overcome our differences and what our structures should look like, what our democracy should look like. So we're going to, throughout the series, going to look at different aspects of these questions. And we're going to start today and next week, we're going to look at the question of what kind of party. Next week, we're going to look at the sort of broad left fronts formations. Today, we're looking at smaller formations, sects in particular, as we called it. Of course, the sects, as we would probably see them, don't call themselves sects. They think they are revolutionary organizations. So tonight, we're going to look at maybe the definition of a sect, what makes a revolutionary organization a sect, what's the problem with that, and what kind of party should we be organizing instead. Very pleased to have tonight two speakers with us, Moshé Machover and Nick Wrack. Nick is going to start first, 25 minutes, then Moshé. I might ask some questions then, and then we're going to open the floor. Thank you very much for both of you for joining us. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Comrade Tina. Comrades, thanks very much for attending. Welcome. This discussion Moshé and I are introducing is, as Tina says, part of the discussions that are parallel to the fusion talks that are taking place. I'm sure everybody by now knows of them. I don't want to exaggerate them or blow them out of proportion. They're small forces. It's the Communist Party of Great Britain that produces the Weekly Worker. It's the editorial board of Prometheus, or at least half of it. And it's the people around talking about socialism from a Marxist point of view, which I helped to organize. So the forces involved are very small. And in some way, you can say that we're so tiny that we may be included in the term sect. I'm sure others will refer to us as sects. So I'll come on in a bit later to what is the how do I see sectism and what I sort of see as a sect. It can be an offensive term to those on the receiving end of it, and I just want to preface my remarks by saying this. Anybody who has stuck out fighting for communism, or as might be termed socialism, over the last 20, 30, 40 years deserves praise and support and encouragement. And there are lots of people in other organizations that I don't necessarily agree with, like the Socialist Workers' Party, the Socialist Party. I used to be in the forerunner of that, the Militant, the Revolutionary Communist Party. I'm not in any of those, and I'm not thinking of joining, but I do commend the people in those organizations for fighting and arguing for communism, even if I don't necessarily agree with the way that they're going about it. I want ultimately to be in the same organization as them, or at least most of them, because I believe that communists need to be united in a unified communist organization, ultimately a mass communist party. So we've got those organizations, we've got smaller organizations. I also believe that there are many, many thousands, possibly tens of thousands of people who, like me, may be described as independent Marxists. I suppose I'm no longer independent in that I'm in talking about socialism and working with others. But before that, and for large parts of my active political life for the last 30 years since leaving the Militant, I've been what's might be called an independent communist, an independent Marxist. It's an oxymoron in a way. That's a word that is a contradiction in and of itself. How can you be an independent communist as an individual, you can't achieve really very much at all. If anything, as part of a communist party, we can achieve a huge deal. But I assume, or I imagine, that for many people like me, I looked around at the various organizations, having left the militant, and there was none that was particularly attractive to me. And one of the main reasons for that is the lack of internal democracy and the way in which there's a lack of debate, difference, or an inability to contain debate and difference in a way that is conducive to progress and resolving issues. And instead of having a form of democracy or a democratic centralism, as it might be called, what you have is a bureaucratic centralism, a centralism that is really controlled from the top, and where the leadership try to reproduce itself, insisting almost on agreement with every single little dot and comma of what makes that particular group unique or different from all the others. And I made a note in preparation for this talk. I might have left some off, but I look around at Britain, or particularly England and Wales at the moment. I didn't include Scotland. Perhaps I should have done. But we've got the SWP, which recently, or over the last few years, gave rise to the splits of Counterfire and RS21. We've got the Socialist Party, which was the militant, which gave rise to Socialist Appeal, which has now become the Revolutionary Communist Party. There's been a further split in the Socialist Party with the creation of Socialist Alternative. We've got Workers' Power, we've got the Revolutionary Communist Group, we've got the Communist Party of Great Britain, which I've already mentioned. And then we've got, perhaps in a different category, we've got the AWL, the Alliance for Workers' Liberty, and I'm going to say Anti-Capitalist Resistance. All of those organizations, to one degree all of those organizations describe themselves as Marxist organizations, as revolutionary socialist organizations, or as communist organizations. And I imagine that when they use the term revolutionary socialist, they use socialist in the way that I have pretty much used all of my life as a communist, in the same way as communism. That is, socialism, a form of society that supersedes capitalism, coming after the abolition of capitalism, and socialist, anybody who supports that idea of a fundamental break with capitalism. So those organizations, you put those on a piece of paper like that, or read them out, and you think, what is the purpose of so many different groups, an alphabet soup of organizations who all, at least on their banner, prescribe the same ultimate goal? Why are they not in the same organization? And I think that that's a problem that confronts us all. Anybody that wants to see the abolition of capitalism, rather, has to confront this issue of the multiplicity of organizations, all smallish organizations, some more undemocratic than others, but all seemingly have some sort of fetishized preference for an idiosyncratic difference with another organization. Or perhaps the split, the fissure, has come about because of a clash of egos, who's going to be the top dog, and so on. And an inability of these organizations really to contain well-trained, educated Marxists, people who have got a lot of ability, but don't seem to survive or exist unless there's a new organization in which some can be the top dog, or there's some little point that's been raised, which leads ultimately to a split. Those of us that are involved in these fusion talks reject, I think all of us reject that approach. And we believe that anybody that agrees with the ultimate goal of communism, the abolition of the present state of society, organization of society, and wants to replace it with collective ownership run democratically in the interests of everybody rather than for the profit of a few, that we share the same goal, and really, as communists, we should be in the same organization. Now, I've said this on other occasions, but it's a criticism that I would make of the leaders of those other organizations that I've mentioned, that at no stage, so far as I'm aware, certainly not in the past 20 or 30 years, have any of them actually said to another, why don't we discuss whether we could be a fused party? Why don't we see whether, in reality, we can overcome some of the petty secondary differences and form a stronger, unified organization? That is a criticism that I make of those, the leading bodies, at least, of those organizations. Because if you look at it and you read the material, it's clear that each one, whether they're big, 2,000, 3,000 members, or smaller, maybe in the hundreds, they each see themselves as being the party, the one true path to God. It's almost like the millennial sects in the aftermath of the Commonwealth in the 17th century, with the defeat of the revolutionary movement, the setback and the restoration of Charles II. You get all these revolutionary religious organizations that split and split and split because they're not making any headway. And there's an element of that in these organizations. But if you look at, for example, the SWP, now I know that there was the issue around allegation of sexual assault that led to the split with RS21. And there may be some justification in that, but it's a reflection of the fact that those comrades didn't see the possibility of challenging the lack of proper scrutiny and dealing with such an issue in an undemocratic organization. So that's a failure of the democratic internal structure. Counterfire, another split, from what I understand, different reasons. But in reality, the politics of those three organizations are very, very similar. Why are they not in the same organization, or why have they not tried to re-merge? The split between the militant and socialist appeal over whether to be in or out of the Labour Party, I look back at that. I was involved in that faction fight, and I do wonder about it, whether it really needed to lead to a split now. I was very much in favour of one side in that debate. But the question now, the RCP has taken the same orientation outside of the Labour Party. So what is the difference in reality between the RCP, the Socialist Party, or for that matter, Socialist Alternative? And then when you look at the two, if you like, family trees, what's the fundamental difference between any of them? And this comes down then to the question of what sort of party is it that we're trying to build? I see the party that we're trying to build as one that commits to a program around which we can all unify and act, being in not necessarily agreement with every single dot and comment, but being able to work together around it. So if there are differences, they should be contained within the party. They should be discussed within the party. They should be opened out in front of the rest of the working class, so that the rest of the working class can make a decision and help to determine how those issues are resolved. Is it really the case that the issue of whether the Soviet Union was state capitalist or a deformed worker state degenerated workers' state, neither of which actually I agree with. But is that a fundamental difference that should lead to 2,000 people being in one organization and 2,000 other people being in different organizations? That seems to me to be ludicrous. It's even less relevant now with the demise of the Soviet Union. There are all sorts of other issues that can arise that have led to splits. But in my opinion, they shouldn't. Differences amongst people who have become communists or who are gravitating towards communists, those people, those of us that are thinking like this, are well versed in the politics of the left, of Marxism and other trends and tendencies. We're involved in class struggle. We come across people who don't agree with us. We come across people who agree with some of what we say and so on. But is there a reason for those of us that share the ultimate goal of communism to be in different organizations? Does it matter, for example, if somebody, and I know that Moshé has a dog in this fight, but does it matter that somebody might emphasize the tendency for the rate of profit to fall within Marx's analysis of economic crisis, or other people disagree with that? For me, that difference should be an area of investigation and dialogue and debate and difference within a party to try to help everybody have a better understanding of what capitalism is, how it works, and how we confront it. If we've got differences, for example, over the transition from feudalism to capitalism, very interesting debates known as the Brenner debates, very interesting to discuss. I'm always interested in theory and history and ideas. But should a difference over that transition really lead to people being in different parties, in different organizations? So what we're trying to do in these fusion talks is work out, well, what will be the program? And we've only just begun to discuss the program. We've had 4 sessions so far, and I think I've mentioned it earlier in the editorial board of Prometheus. I'll just say this in passing. There's a division there with half of the board wanting to continue with the discussions, the fusion talks, and half taking a sort of a step back from that. That's fine. We'll carry on, hopefully discussing with both elements. But we began to discuss the program, and so taking this in the context of the fusion talks and what I've just said about small groups, sects, reproducing the organizations on the basis of idiosyncrasies and so on. And I think what part of the title is the question of ideology. It might be worthwhile people saying what they mean by ideology. Ideology really is a body of ideas. The ruling ideology, Marx said, in any epoch is the ideology of the ruling class. So we have to have an ideological struggle against that, as well as a practical, physical struggle to advance the working class. But what's essential and what's secondary? In my opinion, essential elements are: we agree that capitalism needs to be eradicated, abolished, overthrown. You choose your word. We agree that the working class is the force that can do that. So we agree that any communist party has to be based on and in the working class, although it will get adherents from other classes in society. That the change that we need has to be a fundamental one, a revolutionary one. It's not going to be achieved by gradual tinkering with the present system. It has to be international. So at the last meeting, there was general agreement around those basic ideas. Now, that's not the end of the process. Obviously, in terms of a program, we need to work out other aspects of the program. But if there's agreement around those things, then that's a long way down the process of presenting a program around which people can agree to work. And if people don't agree with every aspect of the program, but can adopt the program as the basis for collaborative working together, then that's enough. So long as the organization is democratic and has the ability for people to raise their differences, because a program has to reflect class struggle. It will change, things will have to be emphasized, have to be changed and altered, and so on. So acceptance of the program rather than agreement with every single dot and comma is the basis, as I see it, for building a communist party and a mass communist party. And the reasons are this. I hope it's apparent that the splits that exist, whether historically coming about or recently coming about, are primarily on secondary or tertiary issues, less important than the main objective that the party should be working towards. And so what we need to do is to try to overcome those differences and create an organization, hopefully with those other organizations, but if not, we'll have to work around them, bypass them, still engaging with them. But the democracy, the internal democracy, means that the organization should not only allow, but actually should encourage people to raise their differences, their concerns, their criticisms, because that's the only way in which ideas can be thrashed out, practical tasks can be thrashed out, it can be worked out in the process of the work of the party, what's the best way of doing things. Errors can be corrected, but if nobody feels able to say, well, we did that wrong, or we didn't get that right, or we shouldn't be doing this, how do we ever correct the errors that we've made? So I would say that it's not only it should not only be permissible to raise a difference, it should be obligatory, and we should create the culture and the internal regimen whereby everybody feels able to raise those points of difference, criticism, and so on. At the same time, my idea of a communist party is not of a loose network. I want to see an organization that is big, obviously, unified, obviously, disciplined. And that means that decisions have to be taken, they should be voted on. People accept the decision without abandoning their criticism or their right to continue to challenge. And so that, to a large part, in my opinion and my own experience, is what's lacking in the other organizations that I've described. Now, I'm sure they will disagree heartily with that. I think that those tens of thousands, or yes, tens of thousands of people who have been through those organizations or who are looking at those organizations must share some of my criticism, because if they didn't, you'd join them. I think if we can get this fusion process right, then a lot of people who have been through the movement and dropped out for one reason or another, whether it's disappointment with the party that they're in, or family, or work, or whatever, will be encouraged to get back involved in a healthy democratic organization that wants to unify people around a program. And that program is one to change society. Now, the idea of that mass party and the democratic nature of that party is actually inextricably tied up and emerges from our idea of how society will be changed, because it won't be changed by an individual or a small group or a small self-proclaimed revolutionary vanguard party of 2,000 or even 20,000. It will be carried through by the conscious act of the working class, acting consciously to carry out the practical steps to abolish capitalism, to create a truly democratic society, including the democratic control, ownership, planning of the resources of the planet. And so if we are to build that mass party, we have to have built in, right from the very word go, the democratic ability to tolerate, encourage differences in debate. Because I'm sure when you go to work, when you go to the pub, when you go to the family for the weekend or whatever it is, you will have differences, you will have arguments, you will have different points of view. And the working class, and particularly those that are committed to improving the lot of the working class and changing society, will have strident opinions. We can't expect everybody, once they join a party, to simply agree with everything. So we have to have a party that is capable of taking hundreds of thousands and millions together towards changing society, towards that ultimate goal which unites us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nick. Well done. I agree with a lot there. Over to you, Moshé.
Thank you very much. I'm one of those independents, or at least semi-independents. I'm not a member of any of the organizations that are now talking about fusion. As I think people know, I'm quite close to the CPGB. I've published many articles in their excellent weekly. And I think the main merit of that weekly is that it is an open forum for discussion, debate on issues concerning the struggle for socialism. You don't have to agree with the views of the editorial board or the central committee of the organization. It is open for debate, and I think this is a huge merit. I feel very excited that if the fusion talks come to fruition and result in a fused organization, then almost certainly I'm going to join it. I feel very excited about it. I feel that the part of the spectrum on which there should be a communist party is vacant. Instead of one mass communist organization, you have a mass of organizations, which I don't want to repeat what Nick has said. I agree with virtually every word that he spoke. I think the method of going about the creation of this organization, of this Communist Party, is the right one. There have been several failures. In fact, the various attempted unification of the left that have been tried in the last few decades did not really even promise to end up with a revolutionary Marxist organization, but they were, I think Left Unity was an example of this. They were really an attempt to create a broad organization, a broad front that would be adjacent to the left of the Labour Party. And I think that is the wrong way of going about it. This is not a part of the spectrum that is vacant, that is calling for a new organization. The closest attempt to form something like a revolutionary organization on the left that I remember dates from 2006. I don't know if many comrades can remember the campaign for a Marxist party. That at least potentially promised to result in something of the right kind, but the way they went about it was quite wrong. It started, instead of cautious and patient talks between various groups and perhaps individuals, leading to a consensus about how to form a new organization. Instead of this, it started with a big conference that a big conference in which each of the small groups, and some organized and some informal groups of individuals, came with their ready-made programs and tried to raise that program for discussion in a big forum. That was a disastrous way of going about it, and the attempt soon collapsed. It didn't, from my point of view, it didn't end up completely with negative results. It didn't lead to the formation of the Communist Party, obviously, but this is the occasion on which I became aware of the Weekly Worker, and my collaboration with it started since then. So there was some, from my point of view, some positive payoff. I would like to address the title that was, I think, given to this session. What kind of party? Non-ideological and democratic. Now, non-ideological, this is, I interpret the word ideology quite a bit differently than Nick. More in the way that Marx understood the term ideology. As far as I'm aware, I haven't read every word that Marx wrote, obviously, but as far as I'm aware, Marx never used the word ideology in a positive sense. I think it is almost always used as a dismissive term, sarcastic or dismissive. And this is the way I understand it. So, of course, by saying that the party that should emerge from the present fusion talks should not be ideological, I don't mean that it should not have a system of ideas. I mean, this would be absurd. But what I mean is it should not be doctrinaire. And that is what I mean by a non-ideological party. There is, because of the ecosystem of small or medium-sized groups, basically sects, there is a tendency to cling to narrow ideas and to be resistant to any re-examination of the ideology that each of these groups is committed to. In this respect, I think it would be a good idea if the new organization, the Communist Party that will hopefully emerge from the fusion talks, will not officially describe itself as Marxist. It should be Marxist, but it should not. Preferably, I think it's not important. It's not important. Probably undesirable to actually put on the nameplate the word Marxist. The thing is that this is something which is unique to Marxism as a system of ideas, namely that in order to be faithful to this tradition, you have to be critical of it. You cannot be a non-critical Marxist. The only way to be one is to be critical of Marx's own ideas. If you accept every single idea that Marx expressed, it would be difficult because they're not always consistent with each other. It changes his mind like everybody else. But if you try to subscribe to every idea that Marx has expressed, then you're certainly not a good Marxist. This in particular applies to the scientific part of the Marxian system of ideas. I mean, I think it is a commonplace that in the heritage of Marx, there is a lot of philosophical ideas. There are historical analysis. There's what is known as historical materialism. There is the dialectic, a specific form of the dialectic. But there is also an important part of Marx's ideas that is, strictly speaking, scientific, in the sense of science as it is understood in English, not in German. The German term Wissenschaft is much broader than the English term science. What I mean is specifically the misnamed labor theory of value. I think that if you look at it, labor theory of value is a bit of a tautology, because the value is defined in this aspect of the Marxian heritage as the labor content, the amount of labor that is crystallized in a given product. It's really a labor theory of price. How Marx is dealing with the problem of how the price of a given commodity connected with the labor content of that is embedded in it, the amount of labor that is crystallized in it in the process of production. This is a scientific problem. Now, you cannot take the way it is dealt with in volume 1 of Capital and then return to, especially in volume 3, as a textbook for the present. It's worth reading. It's important as an inspiration, but it is not a modern textbook on the issue of labor theory of price. Let me compare it with another epoch-making book that was published about the same time, I think 3 years after the first volume of Capital, and that is The Origin of Species by Darwin. It's a tremendous book. Everyone should read it, but it's not a modern textbook on the theory of evolution. There are problems with it, and the science has marched on since the time it was written. I think the same, to a large extent, applies to this part of the Marxist heritage, the labor theory of price. And yet, I find that people cling to the attempt of Marx to solve this problem, which did not actually end up well. I mean, Marx did not finish dealing with it. He got stuck in a rather complex issue known as the transformation problem, and left the whole issue basically unresolved, and left it to Engels to tie up the loose ends, which he tried to do, but in my opinion, not very successfully. I mean, my comrades and I, Farjun and David Zakaria and me, we have tried to resolve this issue. Our way of approaching it may or may not be correct, but what I find really disturbing is that people don't want to listen. When you raise this problem, people come up with a repetition of what they found in a book that dates from the 19th century, and they think that is the answer to everything. I think an even worse phenomenon results in is discernible in the various Leninist organizations, and mainly Leninist various forms of Trotskyism that engage in hero worship, cult of personalities of Lenin that applies to the whole Leninist tradition, and Trotsky in its Trotsky substream. We are not living in 1938. People come up with a transitional program that Trotsky composed in 1938 as if it was a document written in our time. This cannot be true. I mean, I don't want to go into the debate whether transitional demands, a transitional approach is a correct one. That is a debate that is legitimate and I think should go on. And I'm prepared to share an organization with people who think that transitional demands are a good idea. I don't, but I don't mind sharing an organization with people who have this. But what I find very alarming is that people repeat in the present, in our time, Trotsky's assertion that we live in a transitional period, that this is a period of transition. I mean, the word looked in 1938, it was in a way that it was excusable to express the idea that this is a transitional program. In discussing Nazism in Germany, Trotsky asserted in one of his famous articles that the reason for the rise of Nazism in Germany is that capitalism has reached the stage where it is no longer capable of developing the productive forces. I can't give you a chapter and verse, but I remember distinctly reading this is one of Trotsky's articles. Is this a viable position to take nowadays? Has not capitalism developed the productive forces since 1938? I think it was excusable for someone to express this idea in 1938. It is no reflection. I mean, we have something that Trotsky did not have in 1938, namely, we have hindsight. Trotsky wrote on the basis of what he could observe at the time, and it was quite reasonable to assert that capitalism has reached a point in which it is unable to develop the productive forces, and therefore this is a transitional epoch. Now, of course, the hero worshippers of Trotsky extend this assertion. The transitional epoch is the whole century almost that passed since then. But this actually empties it of all useful meaning. Going back to Lenin, we are not living in 1916. I'm referring to the book that I consider one of the least good that Lenin wrote, and that is Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. By the way, it is symptomatic. The original title that Lenin used was Imperialism, the latest stage of capitalism, which meant the latest up to that date, up to 1916, the year when he wrote it. But then he changed it to the title, the highest stage of capitalism, in the sense that there is no further stage. This is it. That is what capitalism has got to, and no further. There is actually not very much about imperialism, strictly speaking, in that book. It's mostly about finance, capital, and monopolization. There are a couple of chapters, I think chapter 5 and 6 are about imperialism. Whether what he says there stands the test of time is debatable. I think it doesn't. But certainly the bottom line of the whole book, I mean, the last paragraph in which Lenin claims that capitalism is moribund, that may have looked the case in 1916. If you look back with the benefit of hindsight, which of course Lenin did not have in 1916, we see that it was quite excusable, it was quite understandable to someone to come to the conclusion that capitalism was moribund in 1916. That was in the middle of the First World War. But it is hardly a correct assertion if you look at it with the benefit of hindsight. Since I've mentioned Lenin, I think I should now allude to the other part of the title, namely democracy. Is the heritage of Lenin a viable one to hold in the sense of democracy? Well, Lenin's attitude to democracy and specifically to inner party democracy changed over time. I mean, Lenin writing about or his practice as far as party democracy in 1912 or 1916 is not the same as in 1922. There have been some changes, and I think not for the better. I think if you look at later Lenin's attitude to party democracy, as expressed in the resolutions of the early Comintern, is not a good model. But I think, with the benefit of hindsight, we should also examine Lenin's attitude to democracy in his better time. That is to say, in the period quite a long time before the revolution of 1917. You find Lenin extolling democracy. I think Lee has the Lenin scholar Lee has reminded us many times that Lenin speaks of democracy and democratic rights as necessary for as air and light. It's absolutely vital. But if you look more closely, I think I find something quite disturbing in Lenin's earlier attitude to democracy. Namely, it is mainly instrumental. That is to say, democracy is important because the proletariat needs it in order to be able to fight for socialism. Democratic rights are essential. They have to fight for democracy because the proletariat needs it in its fight to overthrow the capitalist system. There is very little discussion, if anything, about democratic decision-making in larger sense of the word, especially in the transition to communism in a communist society. Obviously, decisions have to be taken. What is the mechanism for arriving at social decisions in a post-capitalist society, in a communist society? There is no discussion of that as far as I know, in Lenin's corpus of writing. Well, okay, that was then, but we have the benefit of hindsight, and in this case, the catastrophic experience of what the Soviet Union became and began to become very soon after the Russian Revolution. We cannot stay with the attitude to democracy that is derived directly from Lenin without any change, even if you look at Lenin in his better days, as far as the attitude to democracy is concerned. So I think my conclusion on both parts of the title to this session, non-ideological and democratic, is be critical and use the benefit of hindsight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Moshé. That was You spoke a little longer than Nick, but I thought it was worth hearing it. That was a really fascinating talk about question everything, basically, isn't it? That's the method. Question everything, question everybody, especially looking at history, but also looking around at our leaders, as Nick pointed out. Nobody's always right. Nobody has all the answers all the time. And if we have a sort of uncritical attitude to leaders, etc., we are bound to get it wrong occasionally. And people in the minority sometimes get it right, and they have to be able to overturn a majority. So democracy, absolutely crucial. And understanding Marx and Lenin as figures of their time, who sometimes made mistakes, but also provided us with some stuff to learn from. We can certainly learn from history, but we have to do so critically. So two really good introduction. Nick, what you had a slightly different definition of ideology. Do you sort of go along with what Moshé?
Yeah, well, it comes back to this issue that I've raised many times before, is that how we use words. What do words mean? What we have to be careful to try to understand. I didn't disagree with anything that Moshé said in terms of his understanding of Marx and ideology. I suppose what I was trying to say, because I've shared the title with a number of people, and the answers come back to me. How can you talk about building a communist party that's non-ideological? Because people don't necessarily understand it in the way that, say, the CPGB has developed a body of thought about it. So it's trying to make sure that everybody understands what we're saying. I thought the idea or the interpretation of not non-doctrinaire was a good one. I think perhaps not being pettifogging or nitpicking and not splitting over hairs. These are things that basically confound the communist movement. I mean, it's mad. I mean, how do communists expect to organize a change in society when they can't even organize themselves? It makes us. Sorry.
Thinking about definitions of a sect. I mean, as I said in the introduction, members of the SWP don't think they're members of a sect, are they? We've got members in the audience here in our group, members of groups of Trotskyist groups, and we've had discussions, and they don't see themselves as a sect. They think they're just principled. And I think the main difference perhaps as well is that, they say we allow differences internally. Our members can argue with each other, they can argue with the leadership, but we don't want to have it out open in the publications. We don't want it out in the press because that confuses people and it's basically none of their business. Moshé, where do you stand on the difference between internal and external?
Well, I think one of the attributes of a sect is that it thinks that everybody should join it. It is not being non-sectarian. Part of being non-sectarian is being ready to fuse with others. A sect is so enamored with its own ideas, which tend to get ossified over time, is that it thinks that everybody else is got it wrong, and therefore either they convert and join the sect. This of course never works, but I think this is, for me, this is the main attribute of a sect. A sect may or may not be small. Most present-day sects are relatively small, but I think that is not the main problem with sects. It's their refusal to fuse with and live together within a certain amount of differences. Of course, I mean, it's not that everything goes. or anything goes. That is not at all a good idea for a proper communist party. But within certain limits, which should be defined programmatically, I think differences are not only legitimate, but actually fruitful.
Can I just say, Tina, that the idea that a party that is based on and in the working class hides any differences from the people that it's trying to inspire, recruit, give lead to is to me just bonkers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just mad. I mean, we live in a society where people can't, change their T-shirt without it appearing on social media. Everybody knows everything, and young people in particular know. You just need to Google and you get the answer. We know all the differences that take place within the bourgeois parties. We know all the missteps and so on. How on earth people think that they can hide sexual assaults or political differences from others is just beyond me. Really.
Like you get then the announcement at a conference that, for example, you're now called the Revolutionary Communist Party, which I understand was simply announced at the conference. Or you have suddenly changed the line in the paper, 180 degrees different because the majority is slightly changed, from one week to the next. It's mad, yes. Bring in some comrades now from the floor. Bob had his hand up first. Hi.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Nick. Thank you, Moshé. Very interesting contributions. I think Nick, you raised the question very early on about what do the audience think about ideology. I mean, I think for me, it comes down to three things. Firstly, I often associate ideology often on the negative side and associated with dogma. I mean, if you follow a particular line, and if you don't follow a particular ideological line, then to some extent that individual is sidelined or stigmatized within a particular organization. You brought up the theme of the USSR as was, and I think that's a good example. What was it? What was the nature of the beast? Was it a deformed socialist state? Was it bureaucratic socialism? Or in the case of the SWP and the categorization of state capitalism, people have disagreed with that particular categorization. They probably weren't in the organization, to be honest. And I think that was a particular problem. And in that sense, I think you can associate ideology sometimes with something with almost like a false consciousness, if you like. Organizations, Galloway's party nowadays, is based on socialism in one country. The Labour Party's attitude, or the left of the Labour Party anyway, many would fight for the idea of the road to socialism is through Parliament, and it becomes this sort of idea that that is the way to, and if you disagree with that, again, there's a problem. And finally, I think, from my point of view, perhaps the most important tenet and key that I think is associated with this idea of what a party is organization. And I know that two of you touched on it here, the type of organization that we're trying to fight for and build, and how it operates. On one hand, you've got what I consider obviously healthy organization through democratic centralism. The idea that you can raise problems, you can have a full debate, you can argue, and it's okay to disagree. Where on the other hand, as I have alluded to just now, the idea that an organization doesn't permit a voice in the press, for example, that particular individual in meetings can't speak because he or she has disagrees with a particular line. There's a particular gagging, if you like. And so for me, it's the question when it comes to ideology and false consciousness and how an organization is actually organized. And I think, you know, for those individuals who go along with this line of, you know, the strong, determined ideological line, I think there's a need for a cultural regathering and a cultural understanding of how individuals operate in organizations, how we should operate in organizations, what is our best modus operandi, for example. That's more challenging, but I hope we can get there eventually.
Thanks, Bob. Anne.
Okay, thanks very much. So, as comrades will know, I'm not living in Britain. I'm here in the south of Ireland. But I'm very interested in this whole debate and this process. I think it's very heartening that it's happening, and I really wish it every success. And I think that if you are successful, then it will have an impact outside of Britain, because really we do badly need an initiative that basically seeks to create a democratic, open, working class revolutionary party. And in my experience, well, when I was in Britain, I was involved with the CPGB, and I was involved in many of the unity projects at the time, including the Socialist Alliances and the London Socialist Alliance and various other groups or initiatives. But since I've come back, the only one I was involved in was the United Left Alliance, which was initiated, I think, in around 2012. And initially, it was really positive. Lots of people joined who hadn't been in parties before or had been left. And we had 5, I think, TDs elected. So you could see the impulse it gave to left-wing politics nationally. But very soon we had problems between the Socialist Party and the SWP, and you know, their lines were drawn and it couldn't go any further. They prevented it developing into anything more than an electoral front. And that has been the experience of many people who have been involved in campaigns. So there's lots of people here, and of course also in Britain, who really basically don't join left-wing parties because they see them as like prisons for their thoughts. They see themselves as being basically the prisoner of the leadership, and they feel that they're much more free to say what they think, because if they're a member of in Ireland, the People Before Profit, although that's changing a bit, but if you're a member of the SWN, the Socialist Party network, part of it, you can only say their line. You're prevented from saying you disagree with this. And, you know, for people, genuinely, I think most people, they don't want to be like that. They don't want their life in politics simply to be the carrier of the true word. And in a way, what's interesting, what Moshé says about the failure of people to listen to his own ideas on the nature of the profit system and the nature of money and Marx and capital, and the inability to change, develop like new ideas to move on from the original writers, like it must certainly be connected with the nature of political parties. The fact that the communist movement after 1930 really just became a very defensive, you know, Soviet Union loving movement, and then the organizations that opposed that were also very, you know, tight-knit, like not being allowed to have your differences out openly, must therefore mean that there was a restriction on the movement's ability to think and develop its ideas. And then, of course, you have the problem with leaderships. For leadership, the best leadership will try to develop members to be combative and to oppose them and seek to replace them, but I would think within every leadership, even the best one, there will be a tendency to want to stay as leaders, a tendency for their ideas to win out. And so there'll be a certain, I think, a certain conservatism within a leadership. And because of the situation we've had, I think if leadership is not interested in a particular idea, it's not something that they're kind of feeling adventurous about exploring, they want to retain the status quo, then nothing will be done. And it will only be investigated in academia. So therefore, and I'll finish now, Tina, because I know I've spoken a bit. So my area of interest is the communist and socialist women's movement. And there has been very, very little written or explored on that movement outside of academia. And in academia, you see definitions twisted this way and that way. It's not a partisan approach. I mean, I believe we need a partisan approach to our own history. And that doesn't mean making our history suit our own needs today. And it certainly doesn't mean taking the words of Lenin back in 1917 or Trotsky back in 1938 and trying to implement them today, in such an ahistorical way. But it does mean understanding it in context. And then I know I did say finally, for me though, what I'm very interested in is putting ideas into action. And I think that an organization coming together, beginning to work together, many of the problems will remedy themselves, because you're going to be dealing with immediate issues like programs and elections, or some other projects you're going to be involved in. So it's not going to be so abstract. And I think in that process that hopefully very exciting things will happen. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Well, one thing that might happen is collective becoming a party, and we might have to see if we can form a communist faction within it or something, and testing the democracy of that. Jeff, please.
Right. First of all, sectarianism. It's based on sects, which are based, and the problem is their relationship to the working class, that they don't have a proper relationship to the working class. So they stand outside it, producing their circular dogmas. And of course, the moment real struggles appear, they're in a mess. And I think, given across the world, the previous discussions we've had about the economy, our look at what's happening now, we can see that a major crisis is blowing up. And I think this is something that we should pay attention to. Class is the basis of a revolutionary movement, not ideology. Ideology, as Moshé suggested, is always used as a word by Marx as a problem. We don't base ourselves on ideology. We base ourselves on an analysis of the class and its desires and drives and need. That leads us inevitably to be democratic. How can possibly a class in Britain of 60-odd million, across the world of billions, all agree with each other? The mere idea is too daft to contemplate, frankly. I don't like Moshé's idea of pretending to not be Marxist, but really be Marxist. No, Marxism is an ideology introduced in the Second International, not by Marx. And I think we should, in that way, learn more from Marx rather than from the ideologues who followed Marx. And that is a problem as far as I can see. So, a very different view of how a party is based. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Not sure it was that different to what our other comrades have said. Peter Kennedy, can you switch your camera on?
I really have a problem with the word Marxism. I think I regard myself as my thinking is in the Marxian tradition, but Marxism, I mean, it's not something that was introduced in the Second International. The term was used in Marx's lifetime, and he didn't like it. He says, "I'm not a Marxist." So, I mean, Marx couldn't have said, "I'm not a Marxist," if the term Marxism wasn't used by someone. Yes, I think it's problematic. I think every ism is on at least suspicious. But I don't want to throw overboard the Marxian tradition, which I think is a valuable and important tradition, a vital tradition for a Communist Party to be.
Yeah. We've got 3 more people from the floor, then I suggest you 2 speakers can come in, unless Nick, you wanted to say something briefly as well?
No, I'll come back at the end, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Peter, please.
Hi, folks. Yeah, thanks for the talk, Moshé and Nick. Just, yeah, you know, Marx and Marxism, I think, you know, Marx obviously developed the theory of capital, the critique of political economy and much else. He was referring to the way other Marxists of his day might have taken his work and the mantle of the Marxists, and he disagreed with what they were saying rather than saying, you know, let's ditch capital, or let's ditch the way we look at the nature of society and its core development and form based on the form of the surplus extraction and so on. I think we can all agree Marxists can unify over those kind of things and more besides. I think it's an added debate to kind of split them off just like that. My opinion. I think ideology and false consciousness are different. And, you know, an ideology is a worked out map of how the world ought to be, backed up by a movement to pursue that aim and change the world in a certain way. It does have class dimensions because an ideology can be what a mental map which places one particular class or class faction in the dominant position within society based on its worldview. And we see that the way that happens with liberalism, which isn't tied to any one particular class but favours the bourgeoisie. So it's the, you know, there's a kind of complex relationship there that it's neither, you know, yes or no, black or white, and that kind of thing. And if you look at Stalinism, then Stalinism as an ideology because it's backed up by a political movement to put it into place. People who adhere to Stalinist ideas after the fact, after the decline of Stalinism even, maybe, yeah, you know, they come to grips with socialism and socialist ideas and see themselves as Marxists and want to belong to a political party, may have different views of Stalinism, some favourable, but they would be, I would say, false consciousness rather than an ideology. Especially the part of a movement which is has a particular view of Stalinism as being the defeat of the working class, no matter how that's framed in terms of workers' state or otherwise. I think, you know, this is, and you know, the reason why I bring this up is that because I think we should look at the difference between false consciousness and ideology as a mix to understand the differences in unity that Nick spoke about. You know, when it comes to kind of facing other groups on the left, they're not going to go away. They need to be more open. We need, you know, it's to build a mass communist unity, whether you call a party or whatever, a grouping. But that means that we have to work with what we've got. And the difficulty we have with the differences are both false consciousness and ideology. And ideology is the harder thing to kind of budge and move. But I think we have to do it. I think we have to open up and at some point, unless capitalism is going to go totally into barbarism and we let that happen, then we have to find some way of finding a common space. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take being open with ideas, and it's going because it takes experience, doesn't it? It takes experience of seeing your own views being trashed in front of your eyes. You know, the long-held views about certain perspectives on the Labour Party or on you know, the international situation globally, whether we believe in finance capital or we believe in some other form of rule that capitalism has at the moment. So long-held views need to go. And I always think of Thomas Kuhn, who was the philosophy of social scientist guy, and he spoke of paradigms of knowledge. And he was against this kind of naive view of how knowledge develops in a rational way. And you know, almost like the survival of the fittest, the best explanation wins out rationally. And he says that's not the way knowledge develops or programs or understanding of a science develop. It develops in terms of paradigms, groups who have an embedded interest in the overall paradigm of science they're working within, backed up by leaders. And it's more or less two things that make that paradigm collapse. Either the older leaders give way and perish themselves, or something sudden and dramatic happens in the world of the object of study, whatever science that is, and that brings the paradigm to an end, you know. And that makes me think as well about, you know, just how difficult this task is, because I'm speaking of paradigms and saying I'm matching them with sect, you know. So, well, that shouldn't stop us doing it, but I don't think we should. You know, any naivety leads to defeat in the end, and leads to pessimism. Be real about it, and you know, and that enables us to think hard about how we begin to approach and begin to organize and begin to bring people together. You know,
Absolutely, the road ahead is quite rocky, I'd say. Thanks, Peter. Ian.
Thank you, Tina. Good evening, comrades. Just to refresh our memories of the preamble to the founding of the First International, the emancipation of the working classes must be conquered by the working classes themselves. I don't quote that as scripture, but because that ran through the heart of everything Marx wrote about. And I agree the idea of Marxism is one thing, but we use, of course, Marx's method because we regard it as a superior method from a scientific point of view. It's open to refutation, and if I see something better, I'll let you know. But I think what's important, really, when talking about sectarianism, is that the sect puts the interest of the sect above that of the class, and also it's about the coming into being of that proletariat, the coming into being of that class. We've lived through 100 years of defeat, and the consequences of that 100 years of defeat have been that Stalinism, for example, and social democracy in the sense of reformist parties that pretending to represent the interests of the working class have predominated, and that has been a feature of our defeat as a class, and has been historically a blind alley. And it's one which has, in a sense, controlled the working population of the world for 100 years. And we're now only just emerging out of it. Although it can often seem as if, just as you think that things can't get any worse, they just do. On the other hand, we're now in a situation where we really are in a case of naked class struggle again, which is absolutely transparent. It's transparent in a way that I've never known it in my life. There is no pretense anymore about that Israel is some plucky, heroic society or some such that is doing, you know, is some sort of shining beacon of Western democracy in the Middle East. There's no pretense anymore that Britain and the United States are not only complicit in genocide, but absolutely central to the genocide. And from that point of view, what we're seeing is a real kind of opening up of the very nature of capitalism. So no pretense is being made anymore that there will be some way of taking the rough edges off of capitalism through a Labour Party type organisation taking power, because we can see what they're doing. We can see Starmer as a central figure in the genocide. I joined the CPGB at the start of the war in Gaza. I've been a subscriber to the Weekly Worker for a long time because it's pretty much the only paper worth reading, really, on the left, and it does have that not just openness, but a willingness to develop ideas. Hitler and Stalin, between them, managed to destroy any of the people that could have really developed socialist ideas, theoretical perspectives using Marxist perspective, destroyed them for generations. And what we now have to do, quite apart from anything else, is patiently build up the possibility of theoretically appreciating the present as a guide to revolutionary activity in the future. And I think that's one of the crucial factors about the CPGB, and it does have that respect for the theoretical perspective. And what we now need to do is combine it with revolutionary political praxis. I think not only is the current fusion process the beginning of something very important, and I think it will draw in a lot of other people as well once it fully takes place, but it's also, I think, reflected in a far wider society. I don't think there's any doubt anymore about what's going on. And although I don't think that means we'll be storming the heavens in any times in the near future, I'm optimistic for the somewhat further distant future. That whole point about the emancipation of the working classes, act as the workers themselves, is at the very heart of it, and as is internationalism. There can't be any national roads to socialism. There can't be any ridiculous kind of attempts at a kind of Fabian approach to socialism where we win little gains here and there, or pretend that somehow the National Health Service is some sort of shining beacon of socialism in an otherwise hostile capitalist sea. There are now no more shortcuts. There are no more sort of halfway houses that we could sort of safely rest in for a little while. It is naked class struggle, and we have no other choice but to form a mass communist party, because the only other choice is on the cards, is more imaginable, ironically, is that the earth will just be destroyed. And, we're not even talking about barbarism. Albert Einstein's famous remark that if World War III is fought with nuclear weapons, then World War IV will be fought with bows and arrows, has never been truer. So, comrades, join. If not now, then when?
Great contribution, Ian. Thank you very much. Very, very good. It is quite slightly nice to see. Slightly nice. It is very nice to see, actually, that Gen Z, according to a new study recently, is far more radical in their views in terms of, socialism, communism. Yes, they also said they want capital punishment, but I think that's probably a sort of misunderstanding. But they were very keen on, that the old system just clearly doesn't work. And if you're young now and you see, the climate catastrophe, etc., and look at America, look at the governments here, they're doing absolutely zilch. They're not even pretending anymore now to try and do anything about it. So there is some light at the end of a very dark tunnel. Our last speaker from the floor is Owen, and then I'm going to bring Moshé and Nick back in.
Thanks, and thanks to speakers. I'm going to address actually something about youth, which I think is an important thing that I haven't seen talked about in this meet or in last week's. But I think one of the things that has consistently been addressed is this question about kind of ideology and dogmatism and so on. And it seems to me that an important part of that is, or one of the things that's being discussed when we're criticizing sects for dogmatism and rigidity and so on, is an attitude of arrogance, the assumption that because they have their elaborated theories, they have found the truth of Marxism and of society and of socialism. And I agree with comrades that we need to resist the tendency to arrogantly presume that we've found kind of the holy grail of Marxism or of socialism. But I guess my contribution is kind of to bring that spirit into this conversation, and I guess trying to introduce as well a sense of humility about the things that, and a recognition of the things that have led to sects and the sectarian kind of organizational form being so persistent and surviving for so long on the left. And it does seem to me that there are good reasons that sects continue to exist, and we need also to be able to supersede and answer to those good reasons and those actual achievements of sects. It seems to me, for instance, that one of the perennial successes of sectarian groups, formerly I was in the RCP, it's also a long-time success of the SWP often, is the recruitment of young people. And I think that there are numerous good reasons why young people are attracted to sectarian groups. One of them is precisely that sectarian groups are quite good at kind of emanating a sense of confidence. They're quite good at appearing and actually have very strict internal regimes of kind of discipline, high levels of activity, as well as kind of bold messaging and appealing messaging often to young people. And it seems to me that any kind of any project of communist unity needs to be able to address the fact that young people are looking for organizations that have high rates of activity and that can appeal in those kind of direct and bold ways to the energy of youth. And it seems, yeah, and I guess it would. I'd ask the speakers to address then this question of how young people can be attracted away from sectarian forms of organization, and toward this kind of project of communist unity. I think one of the other reasons that sects tend to reproduce themselves and sustain themselves on the left is because democracy is, of course, essential, and I think we're all in agreement about the fundamental necessity of a democratic regime internally in democratic cultures. But there are also practical reasons why democracy needs to be limited. There are necessary limits to internal debate and disagreement and so on, which can at times be exhausting and demoralizing. I think other comrades who've been through faction fights will, I'm sure, testify that internal discussion can often, when it becomes especially intensive, become very difficult to sustain and direct attention and energy away from public work. And there are also, I think, good reasons for groups to operate differently that aren't just about kind of fine points of dogmatism or of theory about like the tendency they rate profits for. It can also be about practical questions about, for example, whether the priority of a communist organization should be in building support in trade unions versus building student groups on campuses versus doing community work and kind of mutual aid stuff. And those are very practical differences and disagreements that any organization, in order to be coherent and united and effective, needs to be able to work through. And insofar as there are persistent differences and disagreements on those questions, it is very difficult to sustain an effective organizational unity. And so I think that one of the other things that sects are effective, or one of the reasons why the sectarian form is appealing and keeps reoccurring, is because there are practical difficulties to doing that kind of work, and there are real disagreements, meaningful and legitimate disagreements about it. And I mean, kind of on a slightly tangential point, but kind of related, I think the other form of humility that I think is important is precisely this question of on the question of internationalism. I think it's important for communists in Britain to recognise how, in many ways, we are relatively marginal. To be honest, if we think about the class struggle as a global struggle, the British working class is nowhere near as central to that struggle as it was during Marx's time. And so questions of international policy, I actually think are still really important, and are, if anything, more important now for the British working class than they have been at times in the past. And therefore questions about, for example, how we characterize not so much the Soviet Union, which doesn't exist anymore, but how we understand and characterize regimes like the Chinese or Cuban regime. These are important for determining the kinds of slogans we might use in all kinds of different situations and crises, which of course we can't anticipate or predict necessarily. But there are, I think, real, meaningful, and like principled reasons why disagreements occur on these questions. And I still don't feel very clear on exactly how it is that a new kind of unified communist group can manage those differences without reproducing the sect form. So those, I guess, are kind of persistent questions that I've had while I've been listening to a conversation that I've very much enjoyed. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Owen. And questions we will be revisiting over and over again, I suspect. Soraya, actually, there was one more person with a hand up. Sorry, Soraya as the last speaker. Hi.
Thanks very much. And it's been a very interesting discussion, and thanks to the speakers. Just very briefly, I think the question of whether something is a sect or not doesn't depend on its size necessarily, but the way it operates. And so proclaiming oneself as a party doesn't mean it makes you a party or any less of a sect. It's how one operates and the democracy that there is. And I think that's something that is, I don't want to join any group stroke party at the moment, but I think it's tremendously positive that those who do agree on the fact that we need that the working class internationally here and everywhere needs a mass communist party. Those who agree that that is necessary are discussing. This is very small. I don't want to exaggerate, but I think it's very positive and is an important step. You've got to start somewhere, not proclaiming that we are the only ones who are trying to start. And I think that the more discussions we have, the more we will find contacts with others, both here and in other countries. And I think it is necessary, just a couple of things that Owen said, it's necessary to have the energy to infuse others. First of all, you need energy because of the class struggle needs it, a lot of it, but also to infuse others. I think that, as I said, that the only way we're going to achieve the destruction of capitalism and setting up a new form of organizing society is by the working class internationally working together, and that includes in whatever you want to call it, Great Britain, the UK, whatever. That's a part and parcel of it, and just as in other countries, given the roles of the so-called workers' representatives, be it in the trade unions or in the official, I'm saying that in the sort of long-standing proclaimed workers' parties, just because they aren't performing the role that they should, and in fact are doing the opposite, doesn't mean that we and nobody is saying this, but doesn't mean that we don't need it. So I think the question of democracy is not a question simply of allowing people to disagree and have disagreements. I've been in organizations where, oh yes, it's all, yes, you can say what you like and so on, you can form a gazillion factions, but in the end there wasn't real democracy, because it was, yes, discuss, but at the end those who were in the leadership decided. So it's not, I'm not saying anybody's saying it, but it's not a straightforward issue, and it's something that we need to discuss and say what we mean by democracy. And for me, it's not a simple issue of people saying, well, yes, and people, communists need to be able to air differences and so forth, but it's not just that. It's a lot more, and I think that that's something that needs further discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Soraya. Okay, comrades, that was a really good, wide-ranging discussion. Now back to our two main speakers to sum up. As Nick went first earlier on, I suggest he's going to go last, if that's acceptable, and Moshé goes first.
Okay, I have very brief remarks. First of all, the idea that the definition of a sect is that it puts its own interests in above the interests of the working class is a bit problematic, because no sect will think that its interests are in any way different from the interests of the working class. That's the part of being a sect is claiming that what it says is the pure and absolute truth. So Owen, the nature of Israel has become a naked truth. Everybody can see it now. Yes, I absolutely agree with it. I'm someone who has been saying things over the years that are now becoming sort of generally agreed. And this is very gratifying. But over and above this, the nature of capitalism is now, these days, becoming so transparent that capitalism is the union of political power and economic power, that imperialism is brute force. You look at the United States, what is happening there, it exposes the nature of capitalism and the present-day capitalism as led internationally by the hegemonic power. The nature of this power structure is now becoming startlingly transparent. How to attract youth? I don't know. There are various ways. I think the best way is that youth is attracted by interesting ideas. This is my experience. I've been, involved in the political struggle since many years. Most actively, I would say, since around 1960. And it has been my experience that you don't have to, as it were, appeal especially, uniquely or differentially to young people, because if you do, then your success in attracting young people will be transient. They will be attracted first, but then they'll get bored with it. But people don't get bored with good, interesting, and fertile ideas, which, of course, have to tally with their experience of the world.
Thank you very much, Moshé. Over to you, Nick.
Well, thanks very much, comrades. Thank you for all the contributions. It's this discussions like this that make me wish that I had 2 hours. Probably you don't wish that, but and also it forces me back to rethink and to read and to go back over my books. I'm not going to be able to deal with anything like the number of points that have been raised, so I just want to reiterate a few things. What's the definition of a sect? Well, a number of different definitions have been put forward, but perhaps in the present period, given that there seems to be agreement amongst those who've spoken, the nature of capitalism demands the necessity of a communist party. So the first thing I want to stress out of this is it's absolutely necessary that we build the basis of a communist party. And I suppose you could say that the definition of a sect in the objective face of that necessity is the refusal to address that question. What I mean by that is the failure to try to overcome the secondary or tertiary justifications, which are not justifications for the separate organizations that exist. Now, what we're trying to do in these fusion talks is just a small step. We're not in a position to try to emulate, for example, the steps in 1920 when 4 or more organizations came together and created the Communist Party of Great Britain. But if we can overcome the reasons why we're not in the same organization, and the program that we arrive at may not satisfy us all. We may think, oh, well, not really happy with that little bit. But we've got the right and the ability to continue to argue. We'll show to others, hopefully, that, yes, that the general position about communism, abolishing the profit system, democracy, internationalism, these things that bind us together help us put other differences into a context, and we relegate those other differences to a subordinate position in the construction of, in the first step, a small group of people who are going in the same direction. And at some stage, I mean, for example, if we do achieve something, and then we get a lot of people who aren't in anything saying this is worth trying out, and join us, then we'll have those discussions that Owen and others have raised. You know, how do we reach the youth? Well, hopefully we'll have younger people than me and Moshé. But we'll take ideas and suggestions. But I actually agree with Moshé on the question of the ideas. You know, what interested me when I was a teenager wasn't the fact that I could race around giving out leaflets or going on demonstrations, but it was watching things on the TV like the American Civil Rights Movement. And I can remember seeing the police unleashing dogs on protesting black students and things like that. And then looking at that struggle and reading about the news and reading about people that were fighting back. And these, similarly today with the question of Israel-Palestine, but there's lots of struggles taking place, which, you know, perhaps the left doesn't address. Sudan, for example, is one. But ideas. So we have to stimulate and interest people in ideas, and it's not always about activity. I think a lot of the left who attract people at university, say, and have this diet of constant activity and energy and so on, and it can burn people out. And when they leave university or get a job or get a family, what sustains them? I think that what has sustained me is the ideas, and that's what sustains people through difficult times. So we have to do that. I can't remember who it was, but somebody was raising about, you know, differences over whether you orient towards trade union work or youth work and so on. Well, you know, to have the problem. But the idea that if you lost out on that debate, that you would then go off and form another organization, to me is mad. You know, so what we do in terms of work and our orientation will also be dependent upon what's going on in society, how many forces we have, and so on. And we may make the wrong decision. We may go and orient one place and we review it and we say, well, that was a mistake. We shouldn't do that again. And we've got to find a way of constantly having a dialogue with the class that we hope to recruit into our ranks. On the question of the program, this is lots of good points that have been made, and I agree with almost all of them. It's a question of accepting the program, not necessarily agreeing with the ideology that has led to that program. So we need a program that we can present to the class. The class can tell us what it thinks of it, the advance guard at this stage. We may want to refine it, but the main ideas are there in the fusion talks. It's filling it out, and it would be good if we got people in this meeting and elsewhere to help us in that. But I think the way that we're looking at it at the moment is that it would be the first step is trying to get this group of these small groups together, and then we will decide or work out how we take the next step, how we open it up, and what we need to do in order to recruit new members. I mean, the point is not to just leave it there, is it? The point is to get the hundreds in the first instance, move to the thousands, and if by doing that we cause ripples inside the working class, inside the trade unions, inside the student movement, but also inside those other organizations. If you're in the RCP and you've just launched yourself a year ago or whatever it was, and you've proclaimed that you're going to recruit 2,000 members in the first year, surely there must be a discussion about why that hasn't happened. If they see that other communists like them are getting together, then maybe some of those members will be saying, well, why don't we take up the offer of unity discussions? Why not? And the leaders can say, oh, these sects, because I know I can just visit it now. I've heard it so many times. These sects on the fringes of the movement, and they're talking about us because they are the one true path to God. People will open up the discussion and say, well, why can't we all be in the same organization? I'm not suggesting at all that it's going to happen overnight, but it's necessary. And if we're going to achieve anything, we have to take the step, and it will be difficult in the first instances because people will say to us, oh, this organization's much bigger, that organization's much bigger. But the question of the democracy, the ability to have the debate, the ability to be confident enough to present our ideas in public and the criticism, and to open it up and to be challenged, and to say, well, we've got members and this member says this and this member says that, and we have it in the pages of the party press, differences, then that is something that I don't think any other organization does. Not in Britain anyway. So that will be really important. That will make us different. And I think, as I said earlier, it's a reflection of the different concept that I think we share about the nature of the revolutionary transformation of society. This idea that it is the working class itself that has to make that transition. It has to take power. It won't be, the SWP or the RCP or the SP riding a tidal wave and sort of being catapulted from the surf into Downing Street. It won't be like that. The first question is, well, what do you do about elections? Do you have elections, or do you just sit there as an incubus? Because if you put yourself to the elections, not everybody will agree with you. We have to win the class to the idea of fundamental change. I just want to finish with this last point, just for consideration. And it's really addressing the members of other organizations to reinforce a point that is important. We've got collective. Tina's mentioned it. Collective is discussions. Basically, it's the prerogative of any political grouping in society to form a party. And this is a grouping of what I would call left reformist social democrats, people that want to manage capitalism rather than end it, coming together to try to get a few MPs into Parliament and be the left alternative. It's a form of liberalism, in my opinion. But what we've got is not the communists in their entirety, so all of those groups that I'm talking about, saying our answer to this is that we get together. The SWP, the RCP, the SP, Socialist Alternative, whoever, their answer should be, if they're doing that, this is what we should do. And they should be part of what we're trying to achieve. But what they're all doing, if you read their press, the Socialist Party is, as I understand it, involved in the collective discussions, just as they have with Tusk, because they see that they are the revolutionary party and they can recruit from what goes on in collective. Counterfire does exactly the same thing. The SWP is considering an initiative to have an electoral turn. It sees itself as the same one true path to God. The RCP probably thinks it's big enough and confident enough to step aside. But what will happen is that they will maybe recruit 1 or 2 or maybe 10 or 20 and so on. But there'll still be this competition and duplication and unnecessary waste of time, of money, of energy, when the skills, the energy, the educational, the experience of all of those communists and those activists in those organizations could be in one party to create one united communist organization in which they can raise their ideas and put forward their modifications to program, to orientation, to methods and so on. And we can thrash it out amongst comrades who all want to see a change in society. That's not going to happen, unfortunately, not without us taking these small steps. With your assistance, we can begin to make a change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, comrades. Great session. I think this was a really useful discussion that could be summed up perhaps as with question everything, question leaders, question ideology, question isms. We have to be able to question everything publicly, internally. Otherwise, we can never win the majority of the working class over to make revolution, isn't it? And I really like what Moshé was saying about democracy. It is an instrument, I think, to win the working class over, but it also has to be our way, our method of building the future society. It has to be entirely democratic. We have to work out how we can develop democratic decision-making processes, because democracy is not just a means to an end, because it never ends. Revolution never ends. We'll have to constantly remake it and constantly defend it and develop it. So a great session today. Next week, we'll be looking at the other side of the coin, which is, of course, what the sects then sometimes do when they say but we are getting with the working class. We are uniting. We are in collective, for example. It's the broad left frontism, which we're looking at next week with Kat Rylands and Marcus Strom, who used to be in the Socialist Alliance. So I hope to see you all there.